What? Okay, I'm sorry.
No. We each
Can I have a mouse, please?
Yep.
Okay.
So you hit the link
What? Yes, I did.
and the password is 100.
Yes, I'm in, honey,
Oh, I
okay?
didn't know that.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
But they haven't started. Do we have volume?
Please. I think so, but I don't know what level the volume is, okay, honey?
Okay.
There's a reason. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, honey,
I need it higher.
that's fine. Okay, honey.
Okay, if I need it higher, you'll put it higher.
Mhm. Listen, okay,
Yep. Hopefully it will go to gallery.
what?
Hopefully it will go to gallery.
Okay, it's now. Okay, honey,
Yeah,
gallery view, okay, honey?
having it on, right, okay, so we're the only ones there.
Hey, okay, where are we?
I see, okay.
Hit the mouse.
It's
Okay.
okay, I was looking at it. So what she does, I don't know if you looked at the sheets, this is an outline
Mhm.
for everything that she's put here. It's not at all like how I read this.
Mhm. Then now 3. Okay.
All right, there are a couple other people who I'm still thinking will be here. So let's wait another minute or two and then we'll start. Thank you all for coming. Very exciting.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Now it sounds less like Sharon here, but I can hear myself think. All right, let's get started. So, hi, welcome back to the new school year. We're going to do something similar this year structurally to what we did last year, but with a very different chapter of Gemara. We are now going to be in the 8th chapter of Masechet Bava Kama, and as you'll see, it's has a sort of a different flavor than the first chapter of Sanhedrin did. This is part 1. I have no idea how many parts this will take. And I tried to predict last year how many parts the first chapter of Sanhedrin would take, and I was off by an order of magnitude. So I'm not even going to pretend I have a clue now. But let's start this adventure and see where it goes. If you are not on my mailing list and you would like to be, so that you can receive the packet in advance before class and you can print it, feel free to email me at deborahklapper@gmail.com, and I will be happy to add you to the list. Okay, so here we are. We're going to start with, and a lot of today's class is going to be occupied with the Mishnah at the beginning of the 8th chapter, which is, as you will see, almost entirely free of any connection to an obvious, well, at least parts of it are almost entirely free of any connection to an obvious mitzvah. And then we're going to spend the next several pages of Gemara trying to connect the Mishnah back with the Torah, because it seems to be describing something which feels very foreign to, if you've been reading about personal injuries in Chumash, that this Mishnah is going to sound very different. And we're going to spend a lot of time trying to connect them back together and demonstrate that, in fact, this Mishnah is what the Torah was talking about. Okay, so we begin here. Somebody who injures somebody else is responsible to pay him because of 5 things, and they're going to end up being 5 payments. And the reason you have to pay and the thing that you have to pay, we're going to conflate those 2 things into one being. Okay, I did not translate the names of the 5 payments because I would like their nature to become clear through their descriptions for at least some of them. And because we're going to be using these labels to describe these payments throughout the entire chapter, and their technical terms, their terms of art, it would be better to keep them in the original, because if we translate them, it's just going to be confusing, and it's going to tempt us to believe that the translation I happen to have chosen has something to do with what the word means, which is not necessarily true. So we're going to call them Nezek, Tsar, Ripui, Shevet, and Boshet. Okay, the Mishnah then goes through them one at a time. Benezek Ketzad. So how do you do Nezek, or what is Nezek? Simat Eno, Kitat Yado Shiberet Raglav. So if somebody blinded somebody's eye, or amputated their arm, or broke their leg, then wrote Inoto Ki'ilu Eved Nimkar Bashuk. we look at him as if he is a slave being sold in the marketplace. Vishamim kama haya yafeh v'kama hu yafeh. And we assess how much he used to be worth and how much he is worth now.
But
Now-
not anything less than that.
Well, so the payment is going to be a reimbursement for the total loss of value of the person. And if this person with 2 arms was a $20 million Major League Baseball player that you could buy in the slave market, and the person with 1 arm is a $100,000 ditch digger, then you now owe him the difference between those 2 numbers.
Right, but is that the case if the damage to his eye was anything less than blinding, or the damage to his arm if he just broke it?
That's a good question. And some of the examples in the Mishnah are going to be specifically chosen because those are the only cases where this would work. And some of them are just chosen because we needed examples, and it's not always so easy to tell which is which. I'll be with you in 1 second, Roni. And here, I think it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
I think any kind of injury that would lower your value as a slave would count. You can have like an insult or a completely curable problem that might not lower your value as a slave, but might incur the other payments. But anything that causes permanent damage to the body, I think, is going to be in this. Yes, Ron.
How is this calculated for people who, let's say, do not have an income? Maybe they are like raising children, or maybe they are disabled in other ways and therefore are not working anyway, or maybe they are children in the first place, or just like any people in our society who are not like being productive and garnering an income.
Good. So that is an excellent introduction to the next thing I wanted to say. When I'm done saying it, you'll let me know whether I answered your question or not. I think any time that slavery comes up, especially when slavery comes up as something that the formal officials are supposed to interact with, I feel like I need to step in and point out that, in fact, I don't approve of slavery. Slavery is evil. Slave markets are evil. The belief that you can sell people and put prices on them is evil. Yes, but there is something lost when you can't put a price on people, because in a world with slavery, we don't need to ask Roni's question, because you can kidnap anybody, a day-old baby, a 90-year-old man, anybody. You can kidnap them, and if you can convince someone to pay you for them, you can sell them into slavery, and they'll be worth something, because they'll have potential to be able to do something later, like the baby, or they'll be able to do something now, right? The person who is missing a bunch of limbs still has some limbs. The person who is, whatever utility this person you could come up with for them, it's not zero. And in a sense, in our very appropriate and good effort to stop putting prices on people, we have, in a sense, at least for this purpose, made many people valueless, which is not a good thing. And I just want to own that that while I think that it is an unqualified good that we don't have slave markets, we are paying a price for that unqualified good. And that price is that we can no longer speak of all people having a value. I mean, we can speak about it philosophically, but it's very difficult to speak about it monetarily. In any case, the world was, if nothing else, it was simpler at a time when people were no different than cans of tuna fish, and you could take them to the marketplace and say, hey, what do you give me for this one? And there was an answer to that question. And there was an answer yesterday when he had 2 arms, and there's a different answer today when he has no arms, and then you could subtract. Things were also much worse in the sense that people were randomly kidnapped off the street, sent to God knows where, and they and their descendants were enslaved forever. Right? That's awful. I would not trade back. But we've paid a price for or this incalculable good that we have. Okay, so that's nezek. Nezek is meant to represent the permanent, irreversible damage to the body, and it is represented by asking how much somebody would pay for the body the person has today compared to the body they had yesterday. Okay, the next one is tsar. The Gemara's examples here, I think, are a little bit more specific. So kiva'o b'shipur, if he burned him with a skewer, o b'masmer, with a nail, v'afilo at tziporno, even on his nail, fingernail, makom she'eino oseh chabura, in a place where it doesn't make a mark of any kind. Right? I think what the Mishnah is aiming for here is an example that will cause considerable pain, but won't incur any of the nezek in the first case. Right? There's no permanent damage to the person whatsoever, but we're torturing them. Obviously, we're describing a crime being committed, so like no one's approving of this behavior. But it's extremely painful, doesn't make a mark. That's what we're aiming for. In that case, omdim kama adam keyotze b'zerotze litol liot misteir kach. We assess how much a person like that, and how we calculate what a person like that is not entirely clear to me, but somebody similar in whatever ways we think are important, would want to be paid in order to experience that. How much would I have to pay you for you to be willing to let me put my red hot poker on your finger? And that's the amount that you have to pay because you did it to them without their permission. Now you have to pay them what they would have demanded to do it with permission. The Gemara is, for an assortment of reasons, not going to like that description of the price of tsar, and we're going to modify it, but we'll stick with that for a few weeks until we get to the Gemara's modification. And by a few weeks, I might mean December. Okay, ripui. Hikahu chayav lirpota. Okay, so the first definition of ripui is that if you hit somebody, you are obligated to heal them. That seems to mean to pay for their medical care. We will see when we get to the Gemara on this, that in fact the Gemara says, if you say, well, I'm a doctor, I'll just treat you for free, the victim / patient is allowed to say, I don't trust you, and I want you to pay somebody else. So actually healing the person is kind of beside the point. The main point here is that you have to pay the bills for a competent doctor to treat them. So if there are growths literally here, but it's some kind of complications from that the person, the path from injured to better is not a straight line, and the person gets worse along the way, then if it's because of the original injury, then the assailant is responsible to pay for that medical care also. And it doesn't say who gets to decide whether it's because of the original injury. Presumably this is a doctor that the court trusts, or possibly a doctor chosen by the patient, I'm not sure. But if there are side medical issues that come up while the person is recovering that aren't themselves caused by the original injury, then the assailant doesn't have to pay for that part. And the Gemara is very reasonably going to say, well, duh. Like, what? It's also true that he doesn't have to pay the guy's grocery bill. He only has to pay the things that are relevant. So why are you listing things that aren't relevant? We'll get to that. Okay. In the meantime, though, it goes on for a moment on this complications thing. Chaytav and istara. Suppose that it heals, but then it gets worse again. And then chaytav and istara, and then it heals, and then it gets worse again. Chayav lirpoto. He has to keep paying the bills as long as the person is still experiencing this cycle. Even though it keeps seeming like he's getting better, he apparently wasn't better because it got worse again.
Deborah, hold on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If it healed, that is it obvious it means that's the result of the original makkah, not of any of the complications?
I think this is true of both the complications and the original makkah.
Except that he's not supposed to be responsible for the complications at all.
Well, he's responsible for the complications if they're caused ultimately by the injury.
Uh-huh,
Right?
okay.
And the Gemara is going to discuss a sort of border case in which it was sort of caused by the injury, but if he'd followed the doctor's instructions and, gotten the amount of rest he was supposed to get or whatever, then the original injury would have healed faster. But he got complications because he didn't follow doctor's instructions and how to care for the injury.
Okay.
It's not always clear whose fault a complication is. But whatever it is that the assailant has to pay for, they're going to have to pay for until it heals completely, even if it's doing this like up, down,
I see.
getting better, but not quite thing.
Okay.
Okay, but then once once it heals completely and it's gone, then the guy's off the hook. He doesn't have to hang around for the rest of his life wondering if he owes more money. Okay, all of that is sort of arcane at best, and we'll have to try to parse it a little bit better in the Gemara later, but let's go on to the next one, Shevet. So Shevet looks like the word Shabbat, and it is in fact has something to do with rest, but keep in mind for Shevet that this person has already been reimbursed for the fact that he's never going to go back to his original job, right? If we had a jeweler whose arms have been chopped off, or a soccer player whose feet have been chopped off, or whatever, right? Like that person's never going back to that old, very lucrative profession that they used to have, but there's something else they could do now. So keep that in mind. So Shevet, ro'ino to ki'iluhu shomer kishuin. For the Shevet, we see him as if he is a cucumber watchman, because he's already been paid. He already paid him the price of his arm and the price of his leg. So if we imagine for a moment somebody who has had all of their limbs cut off, right? So presumably the nezek payment was astronomical. But now this person, for the rest of their life, to the extent that they can earn a living, and they might not need to because, in fact, they could just live off the nezek payment forever. But supposing they're going to earn a living, the best they can do is as a shomer kishuim, a cucumber watchman, which is basically a human scarecrow. You carry the guy into the field in the morning and leave him there all day, and the birds don't want to come and eat your plants because they're scared because there's a person there. And then sometime in the evening, somebody comes and picks him up and carries him home. And he gets paid something for this, but it's not, this is about as minimum wage can get. This is the lowest paid job in society. So you're gonna get paid a compensation for the fact that you can't go back to work while you're healing from your injury, but the compensation you get paid is in the salary of your new job, not in the salary of your old job. And we've taken a very extreme example here, but let's assume for right now that it just means that we would adjust it according to your circumstances. And if you're still have, I don't know, both of your arms, but neither of your legs, and you could, I don't know, be a scribe or something, then you could collect considerably more unemployment while you're recovering because the job that you're going back to is a much higher paid one. Let's assume that. I will have to see what the Gemara does, but for right now, let's assume that. Okay, our last category is in fact dealt with almost not at all by this Mishnah, but later on in the chapter, most of the Mishnah of the rest of the chapter is dedicated to Boshet. We just get like a little snippet here, and then there are, I think, 7 Mishnayot in this chapter, and the other 6 are almost entirely devoted to Boshet. So it will get its treatment, just not here. Boshet, akol lefi hamivayesh v'hamitvayesh. Everything is according to the humiliator and the humiliatee. And here it's worth noting that there's a dispute between interpreters with Rashi on one side and a lot of other people on the other side, whether it's worse and therefore you get more money if the person who humiliated you has higher social standing than you or has lower social standing than you. As in, oh my God, I can't believe that nothing of a person thought he had a right to spit at me. Oh, it's so insulting, right? That it's worse to be insulted by somebody who ought to be giving you honor. And therefore it's like not so bad to be insulted by somebody who's higher than you on the social spectrum. The king won't give you the time of day. That's not such a big deal. But if like, I don't know, whoever you think is your social inferior won't give you the time of day, that's really insulting. That's one side. That's not Rashi. That's everybody else. Rashi's side is the other side, which is that you care much more what the king thinks of you. And it's very offensive, very hurtful to be insulted by somebody who is above you in social standing, and the people below you in social standing, who cares what they think? So the fact that you can make a reasonable argument both directions, it makes it very clear to me that this whole thing is that when we get to Boshet for real, it's going to be really subjective. There's not going to be anything you can. It's going to be very slippery. It's going to be very hard to tie it down. Okay, but before we get anywhere near anything specific about these 5 payments, we have a much bigger problem. Because you might remember that the Torah, on quite a number of occasions, makes quite a fuss about what's supposed to happen if somebody injures somebody else. And it doesn't have anything whatsoever, at least as far as you can tell in the Chumash, to do with money. So first we have to deal with the little problem of why we're talking about payments of money at all. But then we can come back to the specifics. Okay, so the Gemara's initial reaction is, Amai, why? Like, what are you talking about? How could that be right? Ayin tachad ayin amar Rachmana. God said, give an eye for an eye.
Deborah,
Yeah.
in what cases do I just remember learning Chamishit Yosif Alav? What was that for? If you stole from the Beit Hamikdash or something? Not if you hurt somebody.
Right. There are a bunch of cases where you have to add what the Torah calls a chamishit, which is what the Mishnah calls a chomesh, which is what you and I would call 25%. Because it's a fifth, but it's a fifth of the final number, not a fifth of the number you start out with.
Right.
And I don't think any of them have to do with personal injury. There's stealing from the Beit HaMikdash by mistake. There's eating truma inappropriately by mistake. There's when you redeem your maaser sheni with your own money. We saw that one last year in Sanhedrin. But I don't think any of them are about injury.
No. Okay. I just wanted to check.
The Torah does talk about paying money or giving property anyway, which we're going to treat the same way, as a compensation for damaging other people's property. And I suppose this could be disturbing to the 21st century listener, but we are going to assume that all live animals are either wild and belong to nobody or are property. That we're not going to treat them as having souls, and that if we did think of them as having souls, the truth is that the derivation that we're going to fight our way through for the next several weeks would be much easier. But we assume that you killed my cow, you need to give me a cow, just is exactly the same as you destroyed $1,000 worth of my property, so you owe me $1,000. We're treating those two sentences as identical. Okay, in any case, so the Torah, God said an eye for an eye. So ema ayin mamash, let's say that we're actually going to start poking people's eyes out. And we're going to see over the course of the next 2 pages or so of Gemara, we're going to see that we will have a whole collection of different ways of deriving that that's not so. And generally speaking, the Gemara will give one way of deriving a halacha. Sometimes it will give 2. On a very rare occasion, you'll get 3. Here, I haven't counted them, but there are way more than that. Maybe we'll I'll count them as I go through. We'll get to a number eventually, but tonight we're going to see 3, and it's just a taste of the beginning. And I don't know what that means, but my guess is that at least part of it is that we know for sure that this is supposed to be the halacha, but we know that for some reason other than these actual derivations. The derivations themselves aren't the reason we know it. They're just an attempt to figure out how to attach the things that we know to each other. But we know all of them for sure to begin with. And we're not actually deriving news here. We're just attaching what we already know to be true to the words that it has to somehow be connected. In any case, the Gemara says, Lo sal kadatach. Nah, you wouldn't think that. Because the time, it says in a Braita, maybe if you blind somebody's eye, then he should blind his eye. If A blinds B, B should blind A. Or if A amputates B's arm, B should amputate A's arm. Or if A broke B's leg, then B should break A's leg. But we know that's not true because Talmud Lomar makeh adam umakeh behema. The Torah uses similar language to say that a person strikes a person and to say that a person strikes an animal. So it must be that just like if you hit a person, that's for payment, then likewise, if you hit an animal, it's for payment. Likewise, if you hit a person, that should be for payment. That is a somewhat problematic thing, as we will see when we actually look at the psukim. To begin with, the psukim is referencing don't seem to exist. That's a problem. But even if they did exist, there are psukim that exist that seem to contradict this principle, which we'll also see in a minute. But let's finish the Braita first, and then the Gemara will get to what pasuk this could be talking about. V'im nafshach lo. And if you want, you could say this instead. Harehu omer lo tikhu kofer lenefesh rotzeach asher hu resh halam. The pasuk in Bamidbar, in a passage in the Torah that mostly doesn't have anything to do with our topic, says you can't take ransom for the soul of a murderer who is guilty to die, which seems to mean that if the court has convicted somebody of murder, they've been sentenced to death for this murder, and then they or their relatives show up with a large pile of cash and say, here, we'll pay you all this money, just don't kill him. You have to say, nope, sorry, I don't want the money. He has to die anyway. But that seems to be the pshat of the pasuk. But the Gemara the Braita wants to take it a step further and say that if it has to tell me that you can't take, it doesn't say don't take ransom for convicted criminals who are supposed to be punished. Right? It says don't take ransom for a convicted murderer. So that makes it sound like there's somebody else who you can take ransom for. Like it's not a broad across the board rule that if somebody gets convicted of needing to get a corporal punishment, you have to punish them and you can't take money instead. Because if it were an across the board rule, it would just say so. It wouldn't specify this one case of the murder. So they say lenefesh rotzeach yata lokeach kofer. You can't take ransom for the soul of a murderer, but you can take ransom for major limbs that don't grow back.
But
Deborah, it seems to mean arms and legs. Yes.
Sorry, but up above at the very top of the Mishnah, we said that those cases weren't specific. They were more general, that regarding amputating an arm or a leg, didn't just refer to amputating.
And I don't think this just means amputating arms and legs either. I think it's that that's the extreme case, and we're going to logic our way backwards to any smaller case that, if you could take ransom for an arm, you can certainly take ransom for a finger. Or if you can take ransom for an eye, then obviously you can take ransom for a scratch. whatever. Like I don't think we're going to have any trouble including all bodily injuries once we've included amputations of major limbs. I think that's going to all other bodily injuries can follow by Kal v'chomer.
Right, but maybe this is general too. Maybe it just like the specific injuries to specific body parts was not just specific to the body parts, even though the Mishnah phrased it that way. It seemed like it was more general. Maybe here too, the soul of a murderer, maybe it is more general also.
Yeah, so if I had been there in that Beit Midrash, I would be tempted. Well, I don't know, probably I'd be cowed and I wouldn't say anything, but I would want to be tempted to say, oh, wait a minute, why don't we say that the only case you can't take money for is murder, and all other death penalties and all cases of beating people and all corporal punishments except the death penalty for murder, let's get rid of all of them and replace them with money on the basis of this process.
Right.
And in the event that Mashiach arrives tomorrow morning and the Sanhedrin is reinstituted tomorrow evening, that is the first letter I am going to write to them. They will ignore me along with the 20 million other letters that they get. But I think that would be a very reasonable interpretation of the pasuk and of the general direction the Breita seems to be headed. But our Gemara is primarily interested in whether we can take money for personal injury damages, and the question of whether you could take money for, I don't know, violating Shabbat is not really their thing. But yes, I think that would be it's at least a question that needs to be asked, even if the answer isn't obvious.
Okay.
Okay. Now we go to the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know, wait a minute, you said that we had two quotes. One, somebody striking an animal, and one, somebody striking a person. Makeh behema and makeh adam. But in the 24th chapter of Vayikra, which everybody seems to think is what we're talking about here, there are an awful lot of strikings happening. And not all of them involve the word makeh. And we don't actually know which pasuk the Breita is talking about. So it says, "Hi makeh." Which makeh are we talking about? Ilema. Okay, so now I'm going to take out my Tanakh. Let's take a look at some of these. Actually, let's take a look at the whole. I think the earliest pasuk that we quote is pasuk Yud Zayin. Let's look at the whole passage and in order and see what it looks like. Yeah, so I'm going to start from chapter 24, verse 17 in the book of Vayikra. It says, "V'ish ki yakeh kol nefesh adam mot yumat." A person who strikes the soul of a person will surely die. Right? Striking the soul of a person or an animal in Tanakh means killing. Striking can sometimes also mean killing, but striking the soul for sure means killing. So that's a murderer getting a death penalty. Umakeh nefesh behema yishalmena, but somebody who strikes the soul of an animal will pay for her. Nefesh tachat nefesh, a soul for a soul. And that presumably means you killed my cow, you have to give me a different cow, right? Right? You killed the soul of my cow, so you need to give me a different soul of a cow. Presumably you can't bring this cow back to life, and we're certainly not killing anybody because it said you will pay. Okay, verse 19 says, "V'ish ki yitain mum ba'amito," and a person who puts an injury in his fellow, "Ka'asher asa ken ya'aseh lo," whatever was like he did, thus will be done to him. I'm going to leave that vague. Shever tachat shever, ayin tachat ayin, shein tachat shein, kasher, a break for a break, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Kasher yitain mum ba'adam ken yinatain bo. Like he put an injury in a person, thus will be done to him. Now, the kasher most of the time means similar to, which is why this usually gets translated that you should do to the person the assailant the same thing that he did to the other person. But kasher can mean as much as, meaning like more bad things happen to you if you did more bad things, but not necessarily the same bad thing. Like at the beginning of Sefer Shmot, when the Torah says that as much as Paro oppressed the Jewish people, that's how much they multiplied, right? It doesn't mean that they, gave birth to bricks and pyramids, right? Like they're not giving birth to the thing that's oppressing them. It's not that kind of like, it's this, it's, the more you do this, the more you get of that. So it could be that that's what we have here. And it means the more I hit you, the more I'm going to be punished, not necessarily by being hit, but possibly by, having to do something I don't want to do, like pay you lots of money. It's not at all implausible that that's what it means, but it's almost never translated that way. Okay, umakeh adam yishalmena, and a person who strikes an animal will pay. This is different than the last time we struck an animal, because when we struck an animal back in verse 18, that was killing the animal. This one is not striking the soul of the animal, just striking it. So here I think you just you punched my cow. She's alive, but injured. But on the other hand, umakeh adam yumat, but somebody who strikes a person will die. So there's two problems with this pasuk. One of them seems to be that it's explicitly saying that striking people and striking animals is different, which is exactly the opposite of the point that our Braita was trying to make. And the other is that it might indicate that we kill people for something less than murder, because this time it didn't say strike the soul of the person, it just said strike the person. So that's a problem we're not going to get to tonight, but it will be a problem for somebody else. Okay, back in the Gemara. So it says, if we say that we're talking about verse 21, the one I just quoted, that if you strike an animal, then you pay, you strike a person, you die. That's the wrong case. That's talking about a case where we're talking about killing the person. What we wanted to prove was that the case where you say an eye for an eye is talking about money. We don't have an interest in talking about a death penalty really being money. So that can't be the pasuk we're talking about. So elameha. In fact, it must instead be from here. So this is just the verse for the animal, right? Somebody who strikes the soul of the animal will pay for it, a soul for a soul, which, as I said, I think the plausible interpretation of that is one live animal will replace a different live animal, which, as I said before, we're treating animals as property, and you owe me a cow and you owe me $1,000 are completely interchangeable sentences here. So this is a statement that you need to give property or money. The samichle, and adjacent to it, it says, a person who puts an injury in his fellow, according to what he did, that is what will be done to him. So we're effectively saying, and I think actually that what we're really interested in is the next bit of the pasuk, which was a break for a break, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, which is the continuation of this sentence. And I think what we're saying is a tooth for a tooth or a break for a break means the same thing as a soul for a soul meant in verse 18. In verse 18, a soul for a soul meant you had to pay for the dead cow. So here, a tooth for a tooth should mean you have to pay for the missing tooth, because we're deciding that the words should mean the same thing in consecutive verses. The only one problem is that the Braita says he strikes a man. It says he strikes a person. He says it strikes a animal, but the word strike doesn't appear anywhere in verse 19. It says he will put an injury on his fellow. It doesn't say he strikes it. So I love makahu. That's not striking. So we say, they're both talking about striking. It doesn't use the word strike, but it means the same thing. It's true. it does seem to be talking about the same thing, but it does not use the same word. So just as the injuring or the striking that's said about the animals is compensated with payment, likewise, the same thing is true for the person. V'aktiv, but it says, but it says back in verse 17 that a person who strikes the soul of a person has to die. That sounds like striking of people is not the same thing as striking of animals. And the Gemara says, no, that one's also talking about money. Bimamon. It's like, what? Wait a minute. What are you talking about? How could this be money? No, I think this is talking about death. After all, it does say you killed the person, you should die. We do have a death penalty for murder. Nah, lo salkadat. We wouldn't think that that's what that specific pasuk is talking about. Partly because it's right next to the phrase, if you strike an animal, if he strikes an animal, he'll die. And also, ve'od k'tiv batre kasher yitain mum b'amito kinyatain bo. That like what he did to his friend, that's what will be done to him. And we already learned that that was about money. So we end up saying, look, we want the vocabulary to be consistent throughout the whole passage. The soul for a soul about the animal has to be talking about money. That we're for sure not killing people because they killed cows. That's not on the table. Therefore, in order to make the language consistent, we have to first of all say that all of the times when it says strike, it doesn't mean actually kill, it just means injure. Never mind that it said strike the soul of. Ignore that for a minute. And all of the times that it says a blank for a blank, it means pay for. Because we want the vocabulary to be consistent. We want the psukim that are next to each other to share a common theme. And we're learning from one to the other. And so we're learning that the entire passage is about money. Okay, that would be fine. We're going to reject it next week, but otherwise it would be fine. But we have a different problem, which is why did the Braita offer us two derivations? What does it mean? If you want, you could say. You already proved it. Why do you need to prove it again? Well, because tu kakashi latana, the Tana still has a problem. There's a question. My chazit dialafta mimake behema. Why? What did you see that made you want to learn it from striking animals? That doesn't seem directly parallel. Who says that striking animals has anything to do with striking people? Leilaf mimake adam. Let's learn it from a different case about humans. Okay, well, the switching to using the not taking ransom from for a murderer, that's at least connecting it up with a different human damage case. Okay. Amri, so they said, but wait a minute. So I think implied at this point is, okay, then just teach the human to human text. Just tell me about not taking ransom for a murderer, but you can take ransom for damage. But you can't do that because Amri dani nizikin minizikin vein dani nizikin mimita. No, they said, well, maybe we can only learn damages from other damages. Maybe we can't learn anything about the laws of damages from a death penalty case. And maybe we just say, well, we have this wall between the death penalty and everything else, and you can't make analogies across that wall. Adraba. Now, to the contrary, Danin Adam mi Adam, Vein Danin Adam mi Behema. No, we would much rather learn people from people and not learn people from animals. And so we could keep going around in circles all day. But what they've done is demonstrate that one of the halves of the Braita has the advantage of being entirely about people. If we learn from the murder example, then we haven't introduced any analogies between people and animals. And the other side of the Braita has the advantage of being entirely about damages. And we are only comparing damages to damages, and nobody is suggesting that my stepping on your toe is like my murdering you, which might be problematic for other reasons. So that's why it says, if you want, say, it gave you two choices. It's covered all of its bases. If you like this one better, go for it. like that one better, go for it. I'm not going to stand here and try to figure out which one you're going to like better. I'll just give you both of them. Okay, Harei hu omer lo tichu kofer lenefesh rotzeach asher hu resha lamut. And now it kind of repeats the rest of the Breita because it quoted the middle, so it just keeps quoting until it gets to the end. Right, so that's why it said, don't take ransom for the soul of the murderer who is guilty to die, because he must die. You can't take ransom for the murderer, but you can take ransom for body parts. Wait a minute. We thought we learned something else from this idea of not taking ransom. We used that up already somewhere else. This is part of a very famous derivation that you can't give somebody both a financial penalty and a corporal punishment, which is true most of the time, not 100% of the time. That's a separate issue, but most of the time, if somebody is doing something that would get them a corporal punishment, they can't get charged money for that, even if they're not going to get the corporal punishment, because there weren't adequate witnesses, or because you don't have the kind of court that can put people to death, or whatever. It's either or. This is a corporal punishment crime, therefore there's no money payments. And we normally learn that from this idea of not taking ransom for the soul of a murderer. Lo tishko mine mamon v'tiktale. So we learn there, you can't take the money from him and kill him, which honestly is not something that would ever have occurred to me. Oh, sure, we'll take the ransom. Whoops, I guess we killed him already. That, I wouldn't have thought we needed the Torah to tell us that, but okay. Hi, nichte rishato nafka. Now we learn that from the according to his guilt, which is in a different pasuk, a pasuk about, that's soon. Is that like in this week's parsha, next week's parsha? Soonish. About whipping people. It says you should whip them according to their guilt. The word guilt is singular. You can convict them for one guilt, but you can't convict somebody of two. Somebody can't have two convictions for the same crime. So you can be convicted once for one punishment for each crime. So we don't need the ransom source to learn about not charging people money if they also have corporal punishment. So it's available for us to learn about our topic. Yes, sir.
Just a very quick clarifying question about that last bit. So does that mean, just like generally speaking, that if someone does something, but let's say it violates, I thought we just already talked about how like you can, I don't remember the names of them, but you can pay for, let's say, the loss of income, but also like loss of future income, but also loss of like immediate income. Like, so you're automatically already doing two things, right?
Okay, so that is a very reasonable critique. And I think we are going to say that charging you money is all one thing, no matter how many categories we divide it up into. We could say, that wasn't very nice, you should pay something for that. Well, how do we figure out how much you owe? Well, let's, figure out all the different aspects of being injured and assess them separately, add them together, and here's your bill. But it's still ultimately one bill for one action, which is different than naughty, you're a bad person, you shouldn't have hit them, so I'm going to beat you. And also, by the way, you owe them money. Right? That seems like double jeopardy in a way that charging money that's in more than one category doesn't. I think that's the answer, but it's a good question. Okay, are there more questions? Okay, so let me unshare my screen so I can actually see everybody. I believe we're going to meet next Monday night, and then we will be off the week after for Rosh Hashanah, and then I hope back on the week of Yom Kippur, although that is way far in the future at this point. And as I said before, if you are not on the mailing list for the sources, send me an email at deborahklapper@gmail.com, and I'm happy to add you. And I will see you next Monday night at 8. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thanks so much, Deborah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.